From the PEP Radio Newsroom, these are the stories we are covering at this hour. U.S. stock futures fell sharply on Sunday evening as the Trump administration showed no signs of backing off from a wide-ranging plan to impose tariffs. Markets plunged Sunday evening after two sessions of sell-offs that wiped away over $5.4 trillion in market value. Stocks were set to open sharply lower on Monday, putting the S&P 500 on the precipice of a bear market, a decline of 20% from its peak, and an ominous sign for investors and perhaps the broader economy. Dow futures were down 1,250 points, or 3.3%. S&P 500 futures fell 3.7%, while Nasdaq futures tumbled 4.6%. Asian markets are currently tanking. Japan's Nikkei fell 8% at the open. At last check, it was down 6.4%. White House officials provided no indication over the weekend that the president would consider scaling back on the tariffs, the so-called reciprocal tariffs that Trump announced on Wednesday, which include new levies of 20% on imports from the European Union, 26% on Japanese imports, and 34% on imports from China, are due to take effect on Wednesday. The Trump administration, which has also indicated more sector-specific tariffs are coming, says the measures are needed to restore competitive balance and bring manufacturing and jobs back to the United States. However, the speed and depth of the policies announced in recent weeks and the prospect that countries will retaliate as China did on Friday have heightened concerns among economists and investors that the economy could slide into a recession. Asian stocks also tumbled to kick off their week amid fears of the consequences of a trade war, with Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index down 9%, while Japan's Nikkei 225 dropped 6%, and South Korea's Kospi Index and Australia's S&P ASX 200 each fell more than 4%. We'll have more on the stock markets in our evening newscast. Israeli strikes in the Gaza Strip killed at least 32 people, including over a dozen women and children, local health officials said Sunday, as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu headed to the United States to meet with President Donald Trump about the war. Israel last month ended its ceasefire with Hamas and has seized territory to pressure the militant group to accept a new deal for a truce and release of remaining hostages. It has blocked the import of food, fuel, and other supplies for over a month to the coastal territory, heavily reliant on outside assistance. Israel's military late Sunday ordered Palestinians to evacuate several neighborhoods in central Gaza's Deir al-Balah shortly after about 10 projectiles were fired from Gaza, the largest barrage from the territory since Israel resumed the war. The military said about 5 were intercepted. Hamas's military arm claimed responsibility. Police said a rocket fell in Ashkelon City and fragments fell in several other areas. The Magen David Adom Emergency Service said one man was slightly injured. The military later said it struck a rocket launcher in Gaza. Turning the news from Philadelphia. The Philadelphia Trans Wellness Conference, a decades-long event considered the world's largest transgender wellness conference, will not return in 2025, at least not in its traditional format. Organizers announced Friday that the 21-year-old conference will change drastically, moving away from a singular event. Instead, it will pivot to year-round programming. The news comes as President Donald Trump's administration continues to target the LGBTQ+ community, sowing turmoil for local queer-serving organizations. Recognizing the challenging landscape that our trans community is facing today, we believe that the current environment calls for a necessary shift from a single concentrated event to year-round programming, organizers said in a statement. In order to better serve the community and provide an ongoing support structure, we will be shifting to a series of programs that will be occurring throughout the year. And with a format change also comes a new name. Philadelphia Trans Wellness Conference will become the Charlene Arcilla Trans Wellness Collective, honoring the group's founder, a transgender woman and LGBTQ+ activist who worked with the Philadelphia AIDS Consortium for 20 years. In a news release from the Mazzoni Center, Philadelphia's largest LGBTQ health agency, which hosts the Trans Wellness Collective and the former Conference Review Committee, organizers said the new series would enable the group to best serve the community. But members of the local queer community aren't so sure that's the case. The group's announcement was published across the conference's social media platforms and met with criticism. I feel like this would be hurting our community more, one Instagram user wrote. This is wrong, said another on Facebook. Patrick Walden, a Philly-based therapist who is part of the LGBTQ plus community, said the annual conference played a big role in why he even moved to Philadelphia. I fell in love with the city as a byproduct of attending the conference, said Walden, who runs a local practice called Philadelphia EMDR. I'm in my 40s and have been attending the Trans Wellness Conference since my 20s. Walden likened the event to attending a high school reunion. You carpooled with at least 3 friends, drove for hours full of anticipation, then you'd show up to see hundreds of other trans people filling up and spilling out of the convention center, he said. No dates have been announced for initial Trans Wellness Collective events. The Mazzoni Center anticipates the first event will be announced within the coming weeks. Download the Live 365 app to take PEP Radio with you wherever you go. If you are watching our news videos on YouTube, please be sure to subscribe to our channel. That's the news at this hour. Now back to more music on PEP Radio.